So I'm gonna try and finish reading The One-Footed Fairy. I don't know how much I'll be able to read today. I'm gonna get some tea. I forgot to mark the page where I was at, so I'm just gonna start up here. Now, somebody had discovered not long before this night, when they were making ready for the queen, that her throne seemed a little unsteady. A rabbit running through the wood may have joggled it, or some mortal walking that way may have hit it with his foot, not knowing how important it was to let it alone. And really it is surprising that mortals know so very little about what is against the law in the woods. There are ever so many things you can do if you stop and take off your cap and say, by your leave, or even make a bow. But there was one thing that must never be done. Things that are good wood citizens, like lady's slipper or fern, or anything that blooms, red, pink, blue, white, or yellow, must never be pulled up by the roots. Sometimes you may take them up very carefully and carry them to live somewhere else, but you must be perfectly sure you know beforehand that you are going to put them in the same kind of place they are used to living in, and they are going to get water enough to drink. There are very dreadful punishments for people who pull up things that bloom red or pink, blue, or white or yellow, and throw them down to leave them and die. I will not tell you what the punishment is. If you want to find out, you can look in the fairy code. But tonight, when the fairies went to look at the queen's throne, they found it was as firm and solid as a throne could be. They pushed at it and pulled at it. Of course they dared not sit in it. And they all breathed a great breath and said, well, that's all right. And they trooped away and began dancing again. But Tippitin still sat with the leaf over his knees, and he would not dance. The next night, at exactly 12 o'clock, the owls began to call, who, who? And the fairies all answered, Her Majesty, Her most lovely, dear and glorious, splendid Majesty, the Queen. And then all the woods waked up, and even the little grasshopper and cricket things in the fields beyond the woods got out their little musical instruments and piped, and the farmhouse dog called out, Something's up, hark, hark. But as he said it, he went into his kennel just as far as he could, and sat there with his tail tucked under him, for every dog knows what is going on in the woods at night, and that he'd better say as little about it as possible. The queen had come straight through from Lapland by the Crystal Express, and her chariot had not yet melted. It was the most beautiful carved ice you ever saw, and the canopy over it was the loveliest spun frost. It was drawn by 6 northern lights, but they had to be unharnessed at once so that they could go back, because they were needed to make an illumination for a Labor Night parade at the frosts and snows. The queen had hired them on that condition, so when they unharnessed themselves and flashed off, she nodded at them kindly, and she returned to her own people and told them to stand where they were and see her chariot melt. It was a little surprise she had arranged for them, because it was very unusual to see a nice chariot in the woods on a warm summer night. This night was very warm indeed, and the chariot melted fast. But quickly as it went, a great many fairy artists stood by to draw the forms of the snowy crystals to see if they could copy them next winter. And they really got a great many ideas. When the chariot and canopy were quite gone, and there was only a tiny puddle of water left where they had been, the queen turned to her subjects and said, circle about the queen and danced their new dance, and Tippitin sat in the dark little corner under a leaf and did not dance at all. He had taken a thick shadow and wrapped it about him, and if you had been there, even if you could have seen the others, you could not have seen him. Of course, the queen could have seen him if she had looked, because the fairy eyes are the best in the woods, and the queen's eyes are the very best. But she was watching the new dance to decide how she liked it, and though there was still a gap in the circle where Tippitin ought to have been, the fairies made other gaps from time to time, so that she should think that they were a part of the dance, for they all loved Tippitin, and they were afraid she would blame him. When the dance was all over, and the queen had said it was very nice indeed, though not the nicest ever, they looked at one another and shut their mouths tight, because they did not dare to speak. "It's a nice dance," said the queen again. "It's a welcoming dance, your most lovely, dear, and glorious, splendid majesty," said all the fairies together, trembling. They were not afraid for themselves, because the queen is kinder than you could ever think, and no fairy fears her without reason, and just because she is a queen. But they were afraid for Tippitin. That's the illustration. I'm gonna get some tea. That is what it is called, the welcoming dance. The queen put her hand on her chin and meditated. She had caught that trick from the Ice King in the north, who had a beard. "It's a nice dance," she said, "but I miss something in it. I don't know quite what it is, but it's something very fast and sure, and always coming down in the right place. Just take me to my throne. I shall be able to think better there." So the fairies formed themselves into a guard in front and a following behind, and they took her to her throne. They were very silent all the way, because they knew they were leaving Tippitin sitting wrapped in his thick shadow behind, and of course they knew too just what the queen missed in the dance. It was Tippitin. But when the queen had seated herself on the throne, they began to smile again, while she leaned back against the carven wood and sighed a peaceful, happy sigh, and said, "Now I am at home again. This old throne is worth 1,000,000 crystal palaces. You see, if you are a queen, you always think in millions. One palace is altogether too few to talk about." "Now," said the queen, "we have the dance again." So the fairies formed themselves before her in the circle with the gap in it, and they danced all the way more gaily, because they didn't want her to find out anything was the matter. But presently the queen cried out, "Stop, stop," and they had to stop, and the circle with the gap in it was broken, and there were more than 40 gaps. "I should like to be told," said the queen rather grandly, "what is the matter with this throne?" The fairies all trembled. "Your Majesty," they said, "your most lovely, dear, and glorious, splendid Majesty," they said, "it is your own favorite throne." "So I thought," said the queen, "but there is something under it." "Something under it?" cried all the fairies. "What is it that is under it, your most lovely, dear, and glorious, splendid Majesty?" "That is what I should like to be told," said the queen. "It is something that wants to dance, even for when you were dancing, it kept knocking under my throne, and when you stopped, it stopped too. Lift up the throne to see." There's another one. This one's in black and white. I'm gonna get some tea so you can look at that. Oh, sorry. So the fairies crowded around the throne, tugged at it with all their might, but they could not lift it. Of course it would do no good to try and overturn it, because a fairy throne is the only thing you can never overturn. "Well," said the queen, putting her hand to her chin, around and about. What is hidden, come out. What is veiled must be seen. 'Tis the will of the queen. And the throne began to tremble, and it settled a little to one side, for there danced out in the tiniest foot you ever saw, and danced into the gap in the circle, and danced and danced. Ah, cried the queen, now the dance is almost the nicest dance that ever was, but not quite. Slow, little foot, slow, slow, go, little foot, go, go. Follow, fairies, follow me, and we'll see, we'll see, we'll see. And the fairies stopped dancing, and the little foot stopped too. It began to hop in the woods, through the woods, so fast it was like a drop, drop, drop of water off a leaf after a shower. And the queen and the fairies followed it. And what did the foot do but hop straight up to Tippitin, sitting wrapped in his shadow. And when Tippitin saw it, he cried out very loud, and threw off the shadow. And the queen and all the fairies saw he had but one foot. And the little foot hopped up to Tippitin's ankle, and Tippitin bent down and screwed it on. And there he stood on his two trim feet, and made the queen a beautiful low bow. Why, Tippitin, said the queen, why, Tippitin, what made you take your foot off? Your Majesty, said Tippitin, I went to look at your Majesty's throne one day to see if it was all right and tight, and I found there was a little hollow under it, and it made your Majesty's throne jiggle, and I couldn't find anything that exactly fitted to fill up the hollow, and my foot fitted, so I just rammed it in there, that's all. The queen and all the fairies looked at him for as much as 7 minutes, and they were all deeply affected. Then the queen spoke. Henceforth, said she, I appoint Tippitin to be the very much to be honored keeper of my wood-bark throne, and if he finds cause to think it needs repair, he may call upon all the clever workmen of my kingdom to see it right again. But his own feet are needed for my service in the dancing that keeps my kingdom standing while mortal thrones go down. Now, fairies, to the dance. And all the fairies formed a circle with no gap in it, because Tippitin was there, and they danced the dance as it was first intended to be, with no gaps in it. And when it was over, the queen clapped her hands and said, now I see what I missed out of the dance. It was Tippitin, and now it is the most perfectly lovely dance that ever was.